Give us a moment. Chapter 13. I want this done in a certain way. The heading, A State of Grace, written thusly, with horizontal gestures, then a line drawn down, and under it, health, and under that, wealth. Drawing in the air, Seth Jane finished the list, then told me that I was to place a second one, with its own heading, opposite the first. I groped along, not having time to ask more than a couple of questions. A state of grace and out of grace. A state of grace has under it health, wealth, white, and Christian. Out of grace, disease, poverty, black, not Christian. Do you have that much clearly? Yes, I said, although I didn't have the opposing list arranged as nearly as they're shown here. I felt oddly confused since I wasn't sure yet of what Seth was up to. That is not the chapter heading. It is a diagram. Now, another one of the same kind. A state of grace. Out of grace. Indian or Oriental. Out of grace American. Proud poverty. Out of grace embarrassing riches. A state of grace brown skin. Out of grace white skin. A state of grace great mystic understanding, and out of grace callousness. A state of grace great mystic understanding. I already read that one. Cosmic understanding. Out of grace spiritual poverty and disintegration. Another category. A state of grace youth, out of grace age. Intuitive understanding versus rigidity, mental and spiritual ignorance. Knowledge, state of grace, versus ignorance. Beauty versus ugliness. Intellectual capacity versus disintegration of mental capacity. Physical vigor, loss of vigor. An unfolding future, the closing of all doors to activity. Heading for the chapter, good and evil, personal and mass beliefs, and their effect upon your private and social experience. Do you have that? Yes. In this chapter, we will deal with some current beliefs involving your most intimate behavior and social connotations. Now, I outlined some opposing ideals held by many people, all involving concepts of good or evil being applied in areas in which they do not belong. The designations will make certain contrasts clear visually. I simply wanted to launch into the next chapter and to make sure the visual aspects were clearly stated. I will give you the rest of the evening off, therefore, as we are doing very well indeed, and we'll get to some beliefs not dealt with of a social nature, I bid you then a fond good evening. And other issues are working with Rupert, which is another reason for the briefer session. Okay, now back to the next session, 6:50. Good evening. Good evening, Seth. I am glad that you know the day of the month automatically now. Me too, I guess. You will be using your other new gadget often, and also in ways you may not now suspect. These simple diagrams merely represent some general belief systems from the standpoint of moral values. Your ideas of good and evil affect not only your behavior with others, but your activity in a community and in the world at large. Many believe, using the first diagram, that it is good and morally superior to be Christian, white, wealthy, and in excellent health. Now, though this does not appear in the diagram, the word male can also be added to the list of preferred attributes. Reality, then, is viewed through this system of beliefs. If you hold them, you will feel that those characteristics are given by God. According to the fervor with which you cherish these ideas, you will find that they enclose you, for in a very limited manner they will define your concept of good. People entertaining such beliefs are often very religious in conventional terms, Countries emphasizing like beliefs send missionaries to convert those who are pagan and therefore inferior. Individuals feeling this way will be very uncomfortable when they mingle with others of a different race, creed, or color, and despite themselves may be revengefully conservative in dealing, for example, with problems of a community nature. They will consider poverty as a sign of God's displeasure, and so be inclined to leave the entire matter in His hands. They may speak with seeming compassion about the plight of others, and yet all the while consider that difficulty the simple result of inferiority, of inequality. These people may be of any age. They may come from any economic environment. Now, if you happen to be Protestant, male, white, American, rich, and healthy, at least within the framework of your beliefs, you can look at yourself with clear eyes. Your foundation is shaky indeed, but at least you fit within it for the moment. You will notice that I added Protestant to our value system, as well as American. If, however, you hold this group of beliefs and you fall short, that is, if in some way that you do not fit in, then even within that system you are in trouble. Some of the components are more charged than others. A Catholic or a Jew possessing these beliefs is obviously out of step to some extent and will feel guilty as he measures himself against them. A black man who accepts the same system is indeed in difficulty. If he happens to be poor black man, he is in double jeopardy. In that chart of belief, the disease, poverty, femininity to some extent, lost my place, non-Christian concepts, and a non-Caucasian racial heritage are all considered wrong to one degree or another. Any intrusion of other beliefs here will be considered threatening. Both racial problems and religious dissension will be rationalized from the standpoint of these beliefs. Some of my readers may consider themselves quite enlightened, believing, for example, in reincarnation as a series of consecutive lives. However, they may then use that concept to justify their belief in the inferiority of other races. They may say that since an individual chose his or her problems in this life, deciding, for instance, to be born black or poor or both, that karma is being worked out. Therefore, such issues should not be adjusted through a change of law or custom, period. On the left side, looking at the second diagram, you will find people in this case and in this country of a more liberal frame of mind. But you will not find them quite as liberal if you understand that they are as prejudiced in one direction as the first group is in the other. Here we have a system of belief in which it is wrong to be white, American, or wealthy, or even at all well off in financial terms. All of the distortions in Christianity are apparent, where the first group is blind to them, of course. Here, though, wealth and the white skin are not only bad, but obvious symptoms of moral deterioration. If the first system of beliefs sees money and goods as a sign of God's blessing, the second group views material possessions as evidence of spiritual decay. Here the exotic is romanticized, the foreign held up, the picturesque seen as the real. Black skin or brown skin becomes the criteria of spiritual perfection, and poverty a badge of honor to be worn not only proudly, but often to be used as an aggressive tool. The people who follow these belief systems think that they are right. Their living style, community affiliations, and political leanings will be in direct opposition to the white, wealthy ethic. Now, if you happen to be black or brown, poor, and believe in this system, you will at least feel secure within it. If you are instead white and wealthy and hold such beliefs, you will think yourself quite inferior indeed and do everything in your power to show how picturesque and liberal and open-minded and black or brown you can be, while still being fairly white, fairly well off, and perhaps secretly addicted to your Christianity. You will doubtlessly have Buddhas tastefully displayed and Indian beads. We will take a break. The third diagram can cut across the other systems of belief, of course. In the first two groups, there are many leeways. You may have 1, 2, or 3 preferred characteristics that correlate with your ideas, for example, but your concepts about age leave you no such freedom. For at one time or another, all of you, if you're lucky in your terms, will approach old age. Many believe that it is a time of spiritual and or physical deterioration, an era in which all those hard-won attributes of maturity vanish, and the reasoning faculties disappear like grains of sand held too long by the thinking hands of the mind. If life is seen as good in this system of belief, then youth is viewed as the crowning glory, from which summit there is no further journey except descent. The old are not granted characteristics of wisdom, but feared as evil, bad, undesirable, or frightening. To these people, senility seems a natural, inevitable end to life. As mentioned earlier in this book, many who follow such beliefs try to hide them from themselves, desperately attempting to be young. Youth and old age both have their place, and within the framework of your race, each play important roles. You are used to thinking in terms of heredity, in physical terms, and in a different way than you imagine. This is important. Certain earth experiences, however, are dependent upon duration in time and result as a consequence of the mind playing upon its experience through long earth seasons. There are specific functions brought into operation quite naturally that are scarcely perceived by your scientists, much less understood. As the mind within the body clearly sees its earthly time coming to an end, mental and psychic accelerations take place. These are in many ways like adolescents experience in their great burst of creative activity, with the resulting formation of questions and the preparation for a completely new kind of personality, growth, and fulfillment. This would be quite apparent were it not for your current belief systems, through which the old are forced to interpret their experience. Many instances of expansion of consciousness and mental and psychic growth are interpreted by you as senility. No important correlations have been made between the subjective experience of the old, particularly in senile conditions, with those of other ages involved in expansion of consciousness, whether natural or drug-induced. Any such sensations are immediately repressed by the old for fear that senility will be the diagnosis. The experiences, however, affect the right hemisphere of the brain, and in such a way that abilities are released in somewhat the same manner as in adolescence. The individual, when it is time, then begins to see beyond temporal life to open up dimensions of awareness that in your terms he or she could not afford while involved in the intense physical focus of normal adult life. Unfortunately, the personality has no system of beliefs as a rule to support such an expansion. The natural therapies, both physical and mental, are denied. Drugs are often used as depressants, clouding the clarity of what seems to be distorted vision. This is one of the most creative, valuable aspects of your lives. Instead, the old are made to feel useless in your society. Often, of course, they share this value judgment, and their experience within your communities has in no way prepared them to face subjective experience. There are no teachers to guide them. Old age is a highly creative part of living. The connections between it and childhood are often made in a derogatory fashion, but the personality is in just as creative a state. I am speaking generally now, of course, for your living conditions so distort the natural situation. Even the chemical and hormonal changes that occur are those that are conducive to spiritual and psychic growth at that time. The joyful affirmation possible is denied to the old because of your system of beliefs. Take your break. Jane, in a very deep and active trance, had been so focused on the material that she'd been unaware of anything else. Boy, I felt Seth was getting into some really good stuff. A whole new system of geriatrics, she said. I was right into those feelings. Animals already know all of this unconsciously, but it's so strange and funny to be going into things about old age, she continued, surprised. Our society doesn't suspect any of this. I feel very excited about it. Jane and I have had some preparation for the information, at least on emotional levels. My father died in February 1971 after spending 3 years in a county home. Diagnosis, senility. For much of that time, he had been under varying degrees of sedation. In light of tonight's material, I couldn't help feeling that he'd lost part of his natural heritage. Whether he had decided upon that course himself, whether it had been imposed upon him, or both. Seth, I thought, would say that my father chose all the circumstances of his life, and that such a deprivation in old age was a probable result that materialized physically, but while agreeing, I could still wish it had been otherwise. A note about the material. The brain consists of two independent coiled hemispheres lying side by side and joined by a common base. Usually one hemisphere is dominant. Each one is made up of areas or lobes which have specific roles. Brainwave patterns from each hemisphere often vary, as do those from the different lobes making up each side. No two brains are alike, however. Now Jane discovered that she had but one cigarette left. Well, she said, lightening the mood, it's going to be a short session then. Resume the dictation. In certain terms, psychedelic experience cannot be explained within your limited frameworks of reference, not because such illuminations are beyond explanation, but because your present systems of belief are too limiting. So at whatever age, a revelatory episode is difficult to relate to others. In older age, however, no one is interested, and yet it is here, as in adolescence, that the greatest creativity may emerge but go unrecognized. This era could be more advantageous to the individual and to the race than any other period, were it recognized for what it is and understood. The peculiar chemical changes that occur are often precisely those that lead to greater conceptions and experience, but these are free from what you think of as practical application. There is a trigger set off then, an impetus in which the personality tries to free itself from time-space orientation, released from the usual necessity to participate in adult terms. The personality again looks at the nature of experience in its purest terms. In some previous civilizations, this was done within a natural framework in which the old were cared for physically while their words were listened to most carefully. Ideas of the wise old man and similar legends apply here, as do the mystical concepts of the powerful old woman. In their natural progression and left alone, the old understood their own visions quite well. Body and mind operate beautifully together. End of session. My heartiest regards to you both. And now, resuming the session. Now, good evening. And we will resume dictation. Your beliefs about age, like everything else, will form your experience, and your mass beliefs will affect your civilization. With the current concepts held by your society, men and women fear old age from the time of youth. If young adulthood is considered the epitome of life, blessedness, and success, Then old age is viewed as the opposite, a time of failure and decay. Some of this has to do with distorted ideas of both the conscious and unconscious minds, using your terms now. Generally speaking, in Western society, the conscious mind is seen as coming into its own in early adulthood, as the self rises from the bed of childhood unconsciousness into its critical awareness and differentiation. The appreciation of distinctions and differences is considered one of the greatest characteristics of consciousness, and so these aspects of it are valued. On the other hand, the equally significant assimilating, combining, correlating characteristics of consciousness are overlooked. In scholarly circles, and many that are not scholarly at all, the intellect is equated only with the critical faculties, so that the more diagnosis you are, the more intellectual you are considered. During Western years of adulthood, consciousness is focused most intently in one specific area of activity and physical manipulation. From childhood, the mind is trained to use its argumentative, separating qualities above all others. Creativity is allowed to flow only through certain highly limited accepted channels. When an individual becomes older and retired, for example, the focus for that particular kind of concentration is no longer so immediately available. The mind actually becomes more itself, freer to use more of its abilities, allowed to stray from restricted areas, to assimilate knowledge and create. Precisely at this time, however, the individual is told to beware of any such straying, and to consider that kind of behavior a symptom of mental deterioration. Those following mass beliefs will find that their own image of themselves has changed. They fear that their very age or existence in time has betrayed them. They see themselves as leftovers, dim vestiges of better selves, and in their own system of value judgment, they condemn themselves through the very fact of their continued existence in time. If they ever did, they no longer trust the integrity of their bodies. They begin to act out the drama in a script written by others, to which, however, they have acquiesced. It may not seem that there is any connection between that situation and your beliefs involving color, and yet the two are intimately associated. I will let you take a break and listen to your recordings. Now, to resume. You equate the color white with brilliant consciousness, good and youth, and the color black with the unconscious, old age and death. In this value system, the black races are feared as basically the aged are feared. The blacks are considered the primitives. To them are assigned creative musical abilities, for example, but for a long time these were underground activities. They gave birth to acceptable musical productions, but were not admitted themselves into the concert halls of the respectable nation. In your society, therefore, the black race has represented what you think of as the chaotic, primitive, spontaneous, savage, unconscious portions of the self, the underside of the proper American citizen. The blacks were to be oppressed then on the one hand, and yet treated indulgently as children on the other. There was always a great fear that the black as a race would escape their bounds. Given an inch, they would take a yard, simply because the whites so greatly feared the nature of the inner self and recognized the power that they tried so desperately to strangle within themselves. Nations, like individuals, can have split personalities at times, so there was a give and take involved in which the blacks expressed certain tendencies for the country as a whole, while the whites expressed other characteristics. Both groups acquiesced to their roles. In larger terms, of course, each has belonged to other races in other times and places. Or, to be more accurate, in simultaneous existences one plays out the other's role. Applied to old age, the color black denotes a returning to those unconscious forces. Now, all of this so far is from the standpoint of vestiges of better selves, and in their own system of value judgment, they condemn themselves through the very fact of their continued existence in time. If they ever did, they no longer trust the integrity of their bodies. They begin to act out the drama in a script written by others, to which, however, they have acquiesced. It may not seem that there is any connection between that situation and your beliefs involving color, and yet the two are intimately associated. You equate the color white with brilliant consciousness, good, and youth, and the color black with the unconscious, old age, and death. In this value system, the black races are feared as basically the aged are feared. The blacks are considered the primitives. I think they probably copied 2 pages because I just read this. Okay, let me see if I can find. An attempt must be made to correlate seemingly diverse aspects of experience, to combine ideas of light and dark, consciousness and unconsciousness, and so forth, not only in private but mass experience. As mentioned in Seth Speaks, my earlier book, great distinctions are made between your waking and sleeping states. They are neatly divided, with little effort really made to relate the two. Many of you will find it practical to alter your sleeping hours because of work commitments. Some of you will be able to do so, however, and those of you who are really interested in this endeavor can at least achieve some variation on occasion that will allow you to connect your sleeping and waking activities with far greater effectiveness. Those of you who are able will discover that a somewhat altered arrangement will work greatly to your advantage. I suggest a 6-hour sleeping block of time at one session and no more. If you can still feel the need for a greater amount of rest, then a 2-hour at the most nap can be added. Many will find that a 5-hour steady sleeping period is quite sufficient, with a nap as required. A 4-hour block is ideal, however, reinforced by whatever nap feels natural. In such circumstances, there are not the great artificial divisions created between the two states of consciousness. The conscious mind is better able to remember and assimilate its dreaming experience, and in dreams the self can use its waking experience more efficiently. Often in the aged, you find such frameworks coming into being naturally, but those who awaken spontaneously after 4 hours consider themselves insomniacs because of their beliefs, and so cannot utilize their experience properly. Both the conscious and the unconscious would operate far more effectively, however, under an abbreviated sleeping program, and for those involved in creative endeavors, this kind of schedule would bring greater intuition and applied knowledge. Individuals following such natural behavior would feel much greater stability in themselves. Within the general patterns I have mentioned, each will, of course, find his or her own particular rhythm, and some experimentation might be necessary until you learn the maximum balance, but the flow of vitality would be heightened. It is true that the patterns will have their own flow at certain points in your life. Following your own rhythm, longer or shorter periods will naturally ensue. Your consciousness as you think of it will be expanded through such practices. Generally speaking, 8-hour sleep periods or longer ones are not beneficial, nor in larger terms are they natural for the race. There is a give and take chemical reaction, or rather chemical rhythms of reactions that are far more effective in the shorter sleep periods. Many of you sleep through periods that should be those of your greatest creativity and alertness, in which the conscious and unconscious are most beautifully focused and at one. The conscious mind is often drugged with sleep just when it could be deriving its greatest benefits from the unconscious. and be able to poise most meaningfully in the reality that you know. In these instances, the beauty and illumination of your dream state can be clear in the conscious mind and used to enrich your physical life. Contrast in your experience will appear to you in their united clarity. Now, this is the end of dictation and of our session, unless you have questions. Well, none that I can think of offhand. Actually, I was pretty tired. I bid you then a fond good evening, and I suggest that you too at least try some of these ideas that we are offering to others. You may be quite surprised. My heartiest good wishes to you both and to your machine. And I will end it here and start the next session, 652, with the next video.